There's a lot to discuss. We're here with our friends at Konrad Adenauer here at Brussels, supposedly the boring place, but not so many boring discussion. Tell us what's going on in Europe right now in terms of your understanding of transatlantic relations and also what you can see moving forward in terms of relations with us in Asia.
This is really a time of transformation right now here in Brussels. I mean, even before all the hits from Washington actually landed, you had a different change of perceptions. I would say a kind of more maturity from the European side, becoming more pragmatic, becoming more aware that it kind of has to act differently in a much more kind of dangerous world, in a much more geopolitical world, in a much less soft world, if you or less soft policy world. So already this changed, and then of course you had the things coming from Washington as they did. The change of the radical change, of course, of the Trump administration compared to the previous administration. So
You mean the previous Trump administration
no,
even?
the previous the Biden administration. But even I would say, if you compare it with the
Yeah,
previous
exactly.
Trump,
Even the first
last
Trump was not like
administration,
this.
I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of people were here yeah,
We've been there, done
we've
that.
been there,
Yeah.
we know him, yes, it's gonna be tough, but we know a few things.
Yeah.
And I think few people expected how radical this change would be. And this has, I mean, there is always an overuse of the term wake-up call. Sometimes if I hear this once again, I'm going to explode.
Yeah.
But it is really a wake-up call here. I mean, you see stuff happening on rearmament of Europe that would not have been possible, these discussions, even, I would say, a year ago, to that extent. Kind of really the awareness we need to take European security in our own hands. This will not be easy at all, because, of course, this takes time. But the kind of sense of urgency that I feel here is a very different one than even just after the Russian invasion into Ukraine. When we come to ASEAN right now, I would say that there is also a shift of thinking. I mean, the fact that you have so many trade negotiations being kind of relaunched or pushed forward with a bigger appetite shows that not everybody, but many in this city, I think the penny has dropped.
Yeah.
That we need to strengthen the relations with countries that also believe in the strengthening and a kind of multilateral rules-based order, and also believe in boring and pragmatic solutions. So there, I think we feel a different wind, we feel a different dynamic.
Well, I mean, you guys come from Konrad Adenauer, so this is basically we were talking the incoming government. I had a chance to talk to Chancellor Scholz last year and all, so I kind of understand where the Social Democrats are coming from. But as far as Merz is concerned, I mean, this is someone who spent time with BlackRock. We know his background, his connection to the U.S., but he had pretty tough words, like independent from the U.S. Was that the kind of a spur of the moment response? Is Germany seriously going through that? I mean, is this the Zeitenwende proper? I mean, because there's still a debate. How much Zeitenwende have we seen over the past 2 years or so? Yeah.
Well, I think overall, I mean, Zeitenwende was always like the idea of all of Germany. I think also with regard to the military, I think the problem was also that the change came from that people basically saw that the military was not ready anymore. And I think overall, it's not a sign, for example, that the new government is going to say the US are not our partners anymore. I think it's more like the message that comes directly from the US that they say, okay, we need to look for new partners, which you see, for example, also when you look at the news today and you see if tariffs are coming, then the US and then Canada and the EU are going to react together, which I think also shows there's more than enough potential for like extending the hand to the US and building a transatlantic relationship, but it also comes as a reaction to what happens in the US.
Olaf,
Yeah, and really when it comes to Merz, this guy is a pure transatlanticist. I mean, very committed to the transatlantic relation, but it shows to the extent of the shock, actually. And we are not giving up on the transatlantic relationship. No, it's just a kind of reaction or awareness of the things that we hear and that we see, and the awareness that they very clearly want us to kind of deal with security in Europe ourselves. So we really have to step up our game. I would say also the Zeitenwende has been has been
misinterpreted.
talked a lot about.
Exactly.
So, but it hasn't delivered to the extent it could have and should have under the previous government. Now we see at least some steps where I would say, yeah, the penny definitely has dropped. There will be much more investment in
Defense.
Also in infrastructure, which is also part of, I would say, to a certain extent, of the investment in defense. So there you see a change of mindset. Now, I really hope that this stays, because every time you have gigantic packages of money flying around, the temptation is always very big not to at the same time to use reforms and to use this money for things that do not necessarily enhance resilience and deterrence.
Kick the can down the road, more like. I mean, we saw during the pandemic, like so much money was being thrown around, and I know you guys are more fiscally conservative probably than progressives like me, but what I want to understand is that, I mean, in principle, I understand. I was in Berlin just shortly after the invasion happened, and I was talking to friends there, including from your rivals at the FES, and the idea was that like the quarter century is over. This kind of a semi-quarter century of semi-perpetual peace, right, is over, and that it's a very Gramscian situation, right? The old order is dying, but the new one is yet to be born, right? And this is where morbid symptoms emerge. So what you guys are saying is that you're expecting, I mean, Merz has a strong mandate, my understanding is, especially if it forms the coalition that everyone's expecting. Do you think that Germany has what it takes to move in the direction it should? Because you're the third largest economy in the world. I mean, I understand Germany has a lot of challenges, demographic challenges, but depending on how you count it, you and the Japanese are tied for third or fourth largest economy. So that's not inconsequential. You'll remain in top 5 for a few years to come. So many people wonder, why is Germany too diffident? Because during the Cold War, I'm not talking about Second War, I'm talking about Cold War, Germany had a large military, right? I think a lot of historians have emphasized that this reluctance, strategic reluctance on the part of Germany is kind of more contemporary than many people would think. I mean, what is your understanding, especially from the even younger generation than I and Olaf? Yeah.
Well, I think also like over the time, I mean, I think the big advantage of Merz is that he's very well connected within Europe. So I think also with regard to Poland and France, this will be open arms, reach out hand, and I think also that especially the new security order that you see in Europe, that especially with Poland also being an important partner,
right,
that you will see Merz traveling to these two countries first as a chancellor.
Right.
And I think overall what you will also see is like the younger generation in Germany might be a bit different, but I think overall that they definitely understand what's at stake, because I mean it's the first time since a long time that there's a war on the European continent, and that of course also affects a lot of the young people in Europe. And I think what you will see also in the future, which is also what you see already like coming out of the coalition talks, that like the first signs that you're seeing is there's going to be more on, for example, like economic growth to get out of the struggle that Germany is in at the moment.
I mean, the energy shock you got from the Russia sanctions,
Exactly.
among others, yeah.
And then also basically building a stronger core, which will probably also extend to the UK to a certain extent, where you will see, yes, they're not a member of the EU anymore, but they're still an important partner, especially when it comes to Ukraine.
Ukraine contact group, yeah. Do you want to talk about the Poland side? I'm not saying this because of your personal connections, but I met Foreign Minister Sikorski. He had a visit to ASEAN and Asia last year. Very impressive individual. I mean, of course, we're impressed with his wife's also immense literary and intellectual and journalistic work, but quite an amazing guy. Very impressive, very self-confident. I mean, sometimes how I wish more European foreign ministers had that kind of not only gravitas, but that kind of passion they put into every minute of the speech. I mean, even off the record, he would speak in a certain passion. It's like, this is not performative. He's like talking one-to-one off the record. So this is not for the show. Poland is very important. I remember when I was in the Baltic, one Baltic state, relevant nowadays especially, there was this conversation that Brussels overrepresentation of the West, or Western Central European countries. Eastern European countries are not getting as much voice, Baltic. But now I think there's a rebalancing, right? I mean, look at your foreign policy chief. She's the former, Prime Minister of Estonia. Poland is playing an important role. Do you see it as a natural rebalancing or correction of internal voice imbalance? Or you also see that also as a reflection of the fact that they step up to the plate with the Russian threat?
I think you yourself named a number of factors. Indeed, I think with the fact that many of these countries have been actually right about Russia for years,
Yep.
gives them stronger credibility. That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, with time, you get better integrated and you are more respected as member states and so on. There is more, economically, you catch up a lot.
Yeah.
So this is also a
Poland's
factor,
fastest growing, right? Poland fastest growing,
is also a factor that certainly plays a role, and it's long overdue, to be honest. It's long overdue as well. I would also say that even the government color does play a role, because now the Tusk government is very constructive, so has very strong standing here in Brussels. Also due to the fact that Tusk before, he was a president of the European Council, all this plays a role. So he's very respected in the European Council, and so is the Polish government as well.
Yeah.
So therefore, it also depends a bit sometimes which party is in power. But I would say in general, the times where a French president could tell incoming members basically to say that they should shut up and listen, these are long over. These are long over. This time will not come back, fortunately, and these countries play a bigger role. Also, something you should not underestimate. Some of these countries are also now in the Eurozone. So Poland is not yet. So this is still an open question. So therefore, as important as Poland currently is in the European Council, the strong credibility also that it has, of course, on some topics, given that it's not in the euro,
You're right.
this limits a bit the impact.
The finance part.
But that being said, given that the kind of the political part, the foreign policy part is so important right now, I would say you see this kind of disadvantage slightly less than you used to see maybe 10 years ago.
I want to ask about this because one thing I noticed is the president of Poland is not necessarily from the same party as on the opposite side, yet it looks like there's a kind of an alignment on the Russia question. And more importantly, very good relationship with Donald Trump. They had a dinner together right before Donald Trump took over, right after he won last year. Our understanding is that there's kind of this personal, almost emotional level of conversation that the Polish president can have with Trump in ways that I'm not sure any other head of state or leader in the region. Maybe it's exaggerated, but this is my understanding from my contacts in the US, that it's a kind of a very special relationship. I think even Bob Woodward wrote on that in his latest book, War, about this, how, when Trump visited Poland during his first term, right? And how they really impressed upon him the tragedy, the triumphs of Poland. And apparently it did have some effect on Trump. We don't want to be over complacent about it. So Poland also brings that kind of, if I can put it, I think the Indians call it affective diplomacy, politics of emotions. And I don't know, with people like Trump, maybe it matters after all. Are we reading too much into this, you think?
I would say yes, that of course Poland or Polish politicians tend to have a bit, there is more trust, I would say, also across the Atlantic. That being said, I think with now a lot of this trust is being questioned, given that any kind of softening of the position of the West, of the US, of NATO towards Russia may have in the midterm also disastrous effects for Poland's security. So yes, there is kind of a, of course, between the national conservative president and the Trump administration, there may be a bit more proximity. Still doesn't give him a free pass. Does Europe get a free pass just because of this? No, not really. So on the first thing you were right. However, on when it comes between the two biggest parties, there are smaller fringe parties which have a bit of a different approach. But during the main parties and particularly the two big blocks, so the current center-right biggest party and the national conservative piece. When it comes to Ukraine, you have a relatively strong consensus.
Bipartisan, if I can use the term. Yes. I want to go back to what Olaf was mentioning about this, because it always used to be this Franco-German. Now Poland is part of the conversation. My sense is with the Swedes coming into NATO, they may not have the same weight economical and all, but I think they're also bringing a lot to the table. because of their unique history of neutrality and their great sense of themselves and legit capabilities they bring. I mean, you think Europe is ready now, especially with the pesky Brits out of now. Just kidding. That's a joke. You don't have to. No, that's on me. That's on me. No, but basically, you think it's much more possible now to move towards a common foreign defense policy in ways that was not possible for the past quarter of century, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you see it definitely.
Sorry, it's a very big question, but it matters.
I think what definitely a lot of like people here in Brussels saw as positive was when the Swedes and Finns joined NATO, because I mean, this was, I think, something that a lot of people here at NATO and also in Brussels wanted for a long time. But the problem was also like that, for example, Finland and Sweden remained relatively like neutral with their regards, also with the close proximity to Russia, and also, of course, in the Finnish case with the minorities in the Finnish population. But I think overall, what you can see here in Brussels, what is an interesting case with regard to common foreign and security defense policy is like that you still have the problem, of course, with Hungary. Like I think what you will see here in Brussels more and more, also with Merz back in the power, that they will try to like really forge these old relationships, rebuild them, rebuild the German-French connection, rebuild a little bit the German-Polish connection. Because what you can definitely hear is that there has been over time damage also from the communication, of course, of Chancellor Scholz, and that's not a secret. That's something that was basically said by a lot of people here. So I think overall, what's gonna be quite interesting also is to really give also like people like Kaja Kallas time to really implement her like mandate, because I mean we're now like 8 months, 9 months probably in
not even
in the mandate, and I think what is important to also give them the time to really
find their footing.
Because in the end it's 27 member states, and like it's not as easy as, for example, a foreign policy actor in terms of the US or other states, you know.
Please.
I mean, on this, I would say that a strong Franco-German cooperation is a necessary but not a sufficient condition.
Right.
With 27 member states, you need more. You mentioned Poland. Absolutely agree. I would also mention Italy.
Oh yeah, of course. Our Italian Meloni, of course.
So this is, I mean, as much as you had a lot of hoo-ha when she started the government, she has been very pragmatic when it comes to European cooperation, which helped her to get a relatively strong position here. So this is
very interesting.
This is something that you should not underestimate. And sometimes you have various alliances. I mean, even a middle-sized country, that's the beauty of the European Union. Even a middle-sized or smaller country, if they have somebody very kind of capable, very good, then they can play actually a bigger role. Even in it's not always the construct.
I mean, the NATO Secretary General is Dutch, the former Dutch minister.
For example, of the big ones. So this is something to be borne in mind. And Jonas rightly mentioned Hungary, and that in many discussions when it comes to foreign policy, it's currently the odd man out. There has been a lot of patience with that. Now there is a bit less patience, and there is actually a lot of issues. They try to find now solutions A25 or 26. That goes up to a certain extent, and even if Hungary and Orban may be out on when it comes to Ukraine or other discussions, when it comes to strengthening European security and defense, he tends to be a bit more pragmatic. So yes, it's still slowed down by the unanimity, absolutely true. But I think there is now less patience to necessarily always try to find solutions A27. But at least right now we see a bit more of a will to, if necessary, we do coalitions of the willing, and we're not going to
minilateral -1.
Yes, exactly. By one or two member states who have concerns.
Would tell us in ASEAN, my goodness, it's Gehorrors 10 times worse. Last part, I just want to get your point of view. I mean, you are, again, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot as the younger generation here. You are more the Trump era. I mean, I came of age when Obama was rising to power in 2005, 6, and that was, but I suppose your era is more the Trump era. The past 10 years, he has been the most consequential, some would even say world historical figure in Hegelian sense. And I don't necessarily mean it as a compliment, but for what it is there a sense that the Trump shock was perhaps inevitable and at the same time a necessary shock for Europe to really punch at your own weight? Because to be honest, for us Asians, I mean, not maybe in my case, but I think a lot of people underestimate Europe a lot. The way they talk about Europe is not too far from, I don't know, J.D. Vance talking about, like this idea, oh, Europe is the old world, it's done. But yeah, you may not be as vlogger, digital-ish as us in Asia or America, but you have tremendous, especially Germany, tremendous industrial prowess, dynamic economies like Poland. You bring a lot to the table. Your regulatory prowess is world class. I don't think anyone comes close to us. I understand in Brussels you would, but we would love to have some regulations because monopolies are eating us alive in Asia and Europe. Maybe that's the leftist in me.
It's actually also quite interesting because the Indians always, like, when they hear, they're very much happy to talk with us about the regulatory framework and be like, this is world class. So
see, I'm in the same team as Jai Shankar. Like, I love you are gold standard for when it comes to regulation. In as much as I know conservatives frown upon it, but for us in Asia and what I'm seeing in the US, my goodness, everything is all over the place. Do you think the Trump shock not only was probably inevitable, but probably what also Europe needs to punch at its weight and prepare for the rest of the century? The 21st century will be very different from the 20th century.
No, for sure. I think what is a very important point here to make is that you saw how together the European Union acted when Ukraine became a problem. You saw they really moved together. They had relatively fast, for example, an agreement on the sanctions package. They had relatively fast an agreement also on how to do stuff together. And I think that will also be how the future will be, because I mean, you have a lot of these reactionary leaders on the ground. You have, for example, somebody like Trump. You might have somebody like Le Pen in the future. You might have somebody like Prabowo. We talked about it earlier in Indonesia. So I think overall, it's also for us as a young generation to get used to this. And I think also that politics moves a little bit away from this traditional form of engagement. For example, if you take the German elections, I think the parties with the most young votes was the far left and the far right. Yeah. And this
far left did well. They did pretty well, yeah.
Especially with TikTok voters, basically from 16 to 25, which changed when you compare it to the last elections, where it was more the Liberal Party and I think the Greens.
And the Greens, exactly.
Yeah. So you see also that there's a shift in strategies with regard to the far left and far right party, and I think also traditional parties need to find an answer to engage with these young people on these platforms. Not necessarily for example, build the entire platform new, but find ways to engage out of the traditional ways with these people so that they basically also can be involved more or feel more at home also in political parties.
Yeah, you make me sound like a grandpa because I still remember Ronald Reagan.
I'm sorry, doing this. Yeah.
President Bush, But
I remember Bush.
The first Bush, But exactly. But my point being, it's kind of the push, and I hope it's the push that Europe needed. But honestly, we should have heard the kind of the gigantic gong before. Yeah. We had the first Trump presidency, and then sometimes we survived that. Good, this will never come back. Well, and the second really big gong should have been the invasion
Ukraine.
From Russia into Ukraine.
You mean the 2014 one?
That should have been the...
Because that's our sense, the Crimea one should have...
Absolutely, that was the lighter gong, and the bigger gong should have been, the massive gong in 2022. And Europe reacted, it's true, they helped, but not as they should have to the extent. So they did a lot, they could have done more. And I hope now it's really the final reminder they need, and I hope it's not too late. Because especially in order to increase deterrence and your own capacity to act when it comes to defense, this takes time. You're not doing it like this. You need more time for doing that. So I really, really hope that this was the final wake-up call that the EU needed.
Or as the Chinese say, the first step in a journey of 1,000 miles. I think that's a better put it. Very quick last point. Obviously, our conversation here a while ago off the record was more about ASEAN, Europe. I'm very much into this whole middle power diplomacy. I know the word middle power, we can debate that for 2 hours ontologically and epistemologically, but basically the understanding is that not the two big superpowers, right? You and the Indians are in the process of an FTA. Filipinos, we're also there. Obviously, we come in different sizes, but none of us are small enough to be slapped around. And actually, all due respect to some of the smaller countries like Singapore, they're actually doing very well and standing their ground. So it's really not the size and all, but it's this sense of strategic autonomy, the sense that I want to assert and expand my strategic autonomy. what do you think should be the next step for Asia and Europe working together? And when I say Asia, I mean it ASEAN, India, Japan obviously is there, South Korea, big actor, the Australians are obviously there, the Kiwis are obviously there. So much more in the Pacific, Europe. Are you optimistic that that could move in the right direction? Given the immense diversity of course, the region I'm talking about in the Pacific, but still the direction of the wind, if I can put it that way.
I think the direction of the wind is, and there I'm rather optimistic. It's just that I hope the kind of awareness that we cannot screw this up remains. Because when it comes to trade negotiations, particularly, there is always, this is a sacrosanct issue for me. The other one, and I want absolutely this, and this is a red line. You want the gold standard? No, please don't do that. We need these agreements, I think, from both sides, actually, to also reassure ourselves and send a signal to the world, despite of all the craziness that is going on, despite of all the protectionism that is going on worldwide, we're still able to conclude agreements between partners who don't see eye to eye on every issue. So this is absolutely crucial. I mean, if the EU and its partners in the respective ASEAN countries actually manage to do that, then you have, of course, a new momentum, another platform on which the relations are, and where the EU has actually, sorry for using this violation of the English language, the EU has kind of increased its partnerability, its capacity to be a good partner, a reliable partner, and actually, as much as we love regulations, not to get drowned and dragged down by regulations which prevent us from actually doing more courageous steps when it comes to trade agreements. So the wind is in the positive direction, but there is really still a lot to be done.
And what about you? I mean, again, as the young... I'm sorry, I don't want to be so ageist here.
He's not my son.
I know he's not my son too, but no, because I saw the German elections. I mean, the youth really came out and came out in a very different way.
Yeah, but I think also the approach of the EU changed towards Southeast Asia over the years. I mean, with Japan, with South Korea, with Australia, New Zealand, you always had good relations. That's not something new. These were partners that were stable, that were in the region, that not only the EU but also NATO had strong alliances and strong partnerships. With Asia, I think, especially with ASEAN, you see that now in the amount of the FTAs, but you see also they're really pushing towards more like an eye-to-eye level partnership, because I think the big problem over the years was basically this I'm looking down on you, I'm telling you what you need, here are the projects, implement them. Now I think it changed also a little bit over the course of time, and I think the EU also understands a bit better to really work with these partners together. If it's Thailand, if it's, for example, also Malaysia. And I think, of course, it will take time until these partners are also seeing the EU for, hey, they're really coming with open arms and reaching the hand out. But I think, especially in this new time or in this new world order, the EU also needs to make partnerships with these countries, be it countries in South Asia, be it countries in the ASEAN region, and really go to them and say hey, we want to partner with you. And I think that's also something that you will see over the next years, that it's not necessarily the traditional partnerships with all the partners that are directly in the direct neighborhood, but also through, for example, what we talked also earlier about the Global Gateway Initiative, where you really see this is an initiative, once it really is marketed and communicated properly, that you really have a new partnership.
It got an awareness problem. I mean, we were talking to our common friends. Oh, geez. It's the opposite problem of BRI, oversold. This one is super undersold.
No, exactly. But I think also once it really gets more into place, because the EU would take some time. You will have probably 3-4 more years. But then once it's understood by partners, and the partners also this is actually a good initiative, then I think you're really moving forward.
I heard exactly the same thing about Japan. So I was in January in Japan last year, and we were talking about semiconductors, national security, national economic security, and there was this very prominent journalist, American journalist, who said Japan is kind of how construction is made in Tokyo. You'll see 3-4 years there's just hole in the ground, and then suddenly in 6 months you see a skyscrapers popping out of nowhere. Guess what? Exactly 2 weeks later after we left Japan, I went back again for another event. They already launched that $60 billion semiconductor thing. Next thing you know, TSMC is coming in. So sometimes a part of me feels maybe there's also that kind of a Japan out of nowhere moving in the right direction part. I understand that 2022 was a shock. We were expecting more moves in terms of Zeitenwende, but probably, you also have that kind of Japanese side to you. For me, the last thing I want to say, and I keep on saying this, I think all of us are in a kind of a 50 shades of hedging situation, different challenges, different balancing act problems with US and China, different calculus. Some of us are more frontline than the other, Philippines, Taiwan, or in this case, Baltic states and Poland. But what I realize, and I always say, we may not be in the same boat, but we're in the same lake. And I think that's exactly where we can come together and have some really serious conversation. And I'll tell you what, and again, this is not about age reveal or something. I remember when I was studying just in university, the gap I felt with the West as someone coming from the developing world and ASEAN. And now the level of symmetry and mutual respect and understanding, not to mention the weight that all of these booming economies of Asia are bringing, makes me very optimistic and happy for my students that, like now we can study relationship with Europe, not from a position of awe-inspired and all, but yeah, they could be actually good allies on an equal footing in ways you'll never get with the superpowers. Never. Forget about Trump, even the Chinese. They'll never treat you as an equal. There's also always that new tributary relations. Okay, gentlemen, thank you. Fantastic. That's a very Asian way of doing it. Thank you very much for